Reconnaissance, often called OSINT or open source intelligence, is the phase where attackers collect publicly available information about a person, company, or system. That can include social media profiles, public code repos, whois, and DNS records, job postings that reveal tech stacks, or server banners that leak software versions. For example, attackers have harvested employee names and roles from LinkedIn and combined that with email format data to craft highly believable phishing messages that bypass casual suspicion. The defender takeaway is to treat public information as part of your attack surface. Regularly audit what's exposed, tighten privacy and disclosure settings, remove stale or forgotten subdomains, and monitor for data aggregation about your org. If you wouldn't want an attacker to impersonate you, don't make it easily available. Footprinting, or target profiling, is a step that turns scattered reconnaissance facts into a structured map of an organization's assets. IP ranges, subdomains, cloud services, exposed APIs, tech stacks, and even team roles. It's effectively an architecture diagram attackers use to prioritize where to probe next. A real example: adversaries who profile a company's public cloud footprint can discover misconfigured storage buckets or internal management endpoints that should be private. For defenders, the practical action is to keep an accurate, living inventory, document IP ranges, retire unused domains, limit public facing services, and enforce least privilege for cloud metadata and APIs. Visibility is your best defense. Know what you own so you can lock it down when attackers try and find it. Scanning and enumeration are the noisy follow ups to reconnaissance. They actively probe systems to discover open ports, running services, software versions, and user accounts. Think of a scanner as a digital flashlight that lists what's listening and what software is in use. In the wild, automated scanners regularly sweep the internet looking for vulnerability services. For example, widespread scanning for exposed database ports has led to data exfiltration campaigns. Defenders should treat scanning as an early warning signal. Implement network based monitoring to detect scanning patterns, rate limit external probes, and alert on unusual enumeration. Logging and honeypots can help identify reconnaissance before exploitation occurs. Vulnerability exploitation is the step where an attacker turns a discovered flaw into control, whether that is a misconfiguration, a software bug, or a logical issue. Conceptually, it's the bridge from I know about the system to I can change how it behaves. A common example is using a known unpatched bug in a web server to run code or access data. Organizations repeatedly hit by breaches often had public patches available, but not applied. For defenders, prioritize patch management. Use vulnerability scanning to find gaps, rank fixes by impact, and apply compensating controls, like network segmentation or application layer WAF rules, while you remedy. SQL injection happens when untrusted input is incorporated into a database's query in a way that changes the query's meaning, potentially allowing attackers to read, modify, or delete sensitive data. An example is early high profile breaches used SQLi to dump user records from web apps that constructed SQL queries directly from fields. To defend, use parameterized queries or prepared statements so inputs never change query structure. Add strict input validation, database activity monitoring, and least privileged database accounts, so even if an injection occurs, damage is limited. Treat database access as a guarded resource, not an open endpoint. Cross-site scripting is when malicious client-side code is injected into a web page and runs in other people's browsers, enabling session theft, UI spoofing, or credential capture. A real-world case is when attackers have used stored cross-site scripting in the comment section to steal cookies from logged-in users. For defenders, the rule is output centric. Escape and encode every untrusted value when you render it in HTML and sanitize rich text carefully. Implement a strong content security policy to reduce impact and audit third-party widgets that can introduce cross-site scripting vectors. Think of browsers as part of your attack surface and filter what you send to them. Cross-site request for forgery tricks an authenticated user's browser into making unintended requests to a trusted site. For example, causing a logged in user to change a setting or trigger a transaction without their intent. Attackers exploit the browser's existing session state rather than directly stealing credentials. In practice, sites without CSRF protections have seen unauthorized account changes initiated by hidden forms or crafted links. Defenders should implement anti-CSRF tokens for state-changing requests, verify origins or refers, and require re-authentication for high-value actions. Don't trust the browser's context alone. Require explicit proof the action was intended. Server-side request forgery, or SSRF, is when an attacker tricks a server into making requests on their behalf, often into internal networks or metadata endpoints that aren't externally reachable. For example, SSRF has been used to query cloud provider metadata services to obtain temporary credentials. Because the server acts as a proxy, attackers can reach systems that should be private. Defense focuses on restricting where servers can call, adopt allow lists for outbound endpoints, validate and normalize user supplied URLs, and isolate services that should never make arbitrary outbound requests. Treat server initiated calls as privileged and tightly control them. Remote code execution describes any situation in which an attacker can cause arbitrary code to run on a remote machine, the classic full compromise scenario. RCEs can stem from many bugs, from unsafe deserialization to buffer errors. One historic example: vulnerabilities in network-facing services that allowed attackers to run commands remotely and spawn backdoors. To reduce RCE risk, harden inputs and parsers. Run risky workloads in isolated containers or sandboxes. Apply runtime protections, and keep critical services updated. Designing layers that limit what arbitrary code can access reduces the blast radius if an RCE does occur. Buffer overflows and memory corruption happen when software writes outside intended memory boundaries, potentially corrupting control data and altering program flow. This class of bugs has historically enabled code execution, especially in native binaries. Modern languages and OS mitigations like ASLR and DEP reduce the risks, but the flaws still appear in legacy code. Defenders should move more toward memory-safe languages when possible, enabling platform mitigations, adopt fuzz testing to find edge case crashes, and monitor abnormal process behavior that could indicate exploitation. Treat unmanaged memory as a high-risk case area. Authentication bypass and session hijacking aim to impersonate legitimate users. By bypassing login checks or stealing session tokens like cookies or JWTs. For instance, poorly protected session cookies stolen via XSS or weak transport security have allowed account takeover. Defenders should secure authentication flows, use HTTPS everywhere, set secure and HTTP-only flags on cookies, implement short session lifetimes, and require multi-factor authentication for sensitive access. Consider device binding and anomaly detection for security sessions. Protect identity and you protect access. Password attacks include brute force, dictionary cracking, and credential stuffing, the latter reusing leaked username password pairs across sites. Attackers automate attempts at scale, trying breach credentials against many services. Real-world breaches repeatedly show accounts compromised by reused passwords. Defenders should force strong password policies, block common passwords, add rate limiting and account lockouts after repeated failures. Adopt multi-factor authentication and monitor for credential lists referencing your domain. Password hygiene and extra factors make automated attacks far less effective. Social engineering and phishing exploit human trust. Attackers send convincing emails, texts, or calls to trick people into revealing credentials or performing harmful actions. One common example is credential harvesting phishing pages that mimic corporate login screens. For defenders, technical controls help, but people training is essential. Run realistic phishing simulations, teach recognition signals, and establish clear reporting and verification procedures. Make it easy for staff to verify unusual requests and instill a culture of verify before you act. The strongest defense combine awareness with technical controls. Business email compromise is a targeted scam that impersonates executives or vendors to trick organizations into wiring money or revealing sensitive information. Attackers spend time researching corporate structures and payment processes to craft believable requests. Numerous companies have lost large sums after accepting fraudulent invoice emails. Defenders should implement multi-step payment verification, require out-of-band confirmation for large transfers, and harden email authentication with SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Treat payment approvals like high-risk operations that always need human verification. Man in the middle and eavesdropping intercept or alter communication between parties to read, record, or inject content. This can occur on insecure Wi Fi, misconfigured proxies, or via forged certificates. Historically, attackers have used rogue Wi Fi or ARP spoofing to capture credentials on public networks. Defenders should encrypt traffic end to end with TLS, enforce HSTS, and certificate validation. Consider certificate pinning for critical apps, and detect anomalous network routing. Encrypt everything in transit and monitor for abnormal certificate or routing changes. DNS attacks manipulate domain name resolution so users are redirected to attacker controlled systems or traffic is intercepted. Attackers can poison cache, hijack registrar accounts, or change DNS records to point domains to malicious hosts. Major incidents have occurred when registers were compromised and attackers swapped records to intercept email or redirect websites. Defenders should protect register accounts with strong access controls and multi-factor authentication. Enable DNS SEC where possible, and monitor DNS change logs for unauthorized modifications. Your DNS is a part of your trust fabric. Protect it. Wireless attacks exploit weak Wi Fi settings, outdated protocols, or deliberately deployed rogue access points to trick clients into connecting and intercepting traffic. Attackers sometimes place a rogue AP named similarly to a copy shop network and capture credentials. Defenders should use modern standards like WPA3 and Enterprise 802.1x, segment guest Wi Fi from internal networks, and use intrusion detection for rogue APs. Educate users to avoid connecting to untrusted hotspots. Physical awareness and network controls go hand in hand. Bluetooth and IoT attacks target device pairing weaknesses, insecure services, or outdated firmware on smart devices and sensors. Vulnerable smart cameras or light bulbs with default credentials have been used as pivot points into home or enterprise networks. Defenders should isolate IoT devices on segmented networks, enforce automatic firmware updates where supported, change default credentials, and minimize exposed services. Treat IoT as an untrusted zone by default and restrict its access to critical resources. Firmware and embedded attacks target the low-level code running on devices. Insecure boot chains, unsigned updates, or hard-coded credentials can all create persistent compromises. Attacks on routers or industrial controllers have led to long-lived breaches because firmware is rarely updated. Defenders should implement secure boot, require signed firmware updates, inventory device firmware versions, and eliminate default credentials. Lifecycle management for hardware is critical. Treat firmware like software and update it responsibly. Malware comes in many forms: Trojans that hide inside legitimate programs, worms that self propagate, ransomware that encrypts and extorts, and rootkits that hide deep inside systems. Each type leaves distinct telemetry and goals, from data theft to disruption. Defenders should use layered controls, endpoint detection and response, network monitoring, offline backups for ransomware resilience, and practice incident response playbooks. Focus on detection, containment, and recovery because fast practice response limits damage. AI assisted attacks use machine learning and generative models to automate reconnaissance, craft highly personalized phishing, or generate deepfakes at scale, increasing both speed and believability. For example, attackers have used AI to write convincing spear phishing messages tailored to a target's social media activity. Defenders should combine automated detection with human review, train staff on AI powered threats, run adversarial tests against their systems, and use authentication checks that are resistant to synthetic impersonation. Treat AI as both a threat and a tool for improved defense. And that wraps up today's breakdown. Remember, these videos are here to explain how different hacking methods work so you can understand the risks and defend against them. Never try these techniques on systems you don't own or have permission to test. Unauthorized hacking is illegal. If you found this useful, hit that like button, subscribe to HackByte, and share it with someone who's learning cybersecurity. Want to dive deeper or ask questions? Join the HackByte community on Discord. The link's in the description. And check out my GitHub for projects and resources. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.